Hitman, the untold story of Canada's deadliest killer, an amazing new book out right now, and I couldn't put it down. I'm so pleased to have the authors with me, Julian Sher and Lisa Fitterman. And let's be full disclosure, you are a married couple. I'm going to
We
ask
are.
I'm going to ask Lisa first, not Julian. How did you decide that you were going to write a book with your husband?
It was actually Julian who came to me after his agent had called to ask if he was interested in writing another biker book. And his first knee-jerk reaction was no. Uh, but then he began to think, we worked beside each other for so long, over 25 years. And the topic was such that I had something to offer. I covered the biker trials. I covered the first Boucher trial, part of Operation Shark. And so we talked about it. And Julian went back to his agent and said, if I do it with Lisa, I, I'd be willing to do it.
Yeah,
And
I figured Lisa's experience at the Gazette and then my experience with the two previous biker books and documentaries, I kind of knew the street, the gangs, the cops. We'd make a good pair, having never worked together on the same project. But both our agents warned us because they said, any team, much less a married team, working together on a book could end up coming to blows. Um, but we rolled the dice,
and we
and
did. We
yeah,
did.
I'm going to
and we
ask you
had
about
names,
that.
and we had names of hitmen in case it got bad. Um, no, but in the end, it worked out quite well. We generally had a lot of fun, and we're very pleased with the final result. It's quite a rollicking tale.
So tell me, how long, Julian, did it take you from start to finish to do this book?
Didn't I think it was just over about a year and a half. We benefited from the fact that we both know the biker world and the Quebec justice system. But the challenge with the book, any true crime book is hard. This is nonfiction. Every fact has to be true. But a lot of the action takes place in the 70s and the 80s. Most of the people are dead. Some are still in prison. Many don't want to talk. So the challenge was to bring the characters alive. The main character, Yves Apache Trudeau, who was a Hells Angels assassin and killed more than 43 people based on his own testimony, he's dead. And so we had to find ways of bringing them alive. And one of the ways was Lisa spending days, if not weeks, going through the Allo Police archives.
with plastic gloves because the pages were so fragile they would fall apart if you touched them. It
Wow.
was it was quite a an enterprise. Yes.
So, Lisa, we know what it's like when anyone goes to work on a given day. You have colleagues, you spend hours working with them, but then you usually go home and you're with your family and you have your weekends. So, before we dig into the book, what's it like when you and your husband are writing a book? I mean, is this like a 7 day a week thing? I mean, you're working together all day, then you're talking about it at supper, you're talking about it before you go to sleep, you're talking about it during commercials at TV. What's how does it all unfold?
Mike, I would have to tell him to shut up sometimes. Julian is a very prodigious worker, and he would tend to get up at around 4 a.m. And by the time I got up at 5, I'm an early riser too. He would have lists of questions for me. And I would have to tell him, like, please let me have a cup of coffee first before you start in. And, at times it felt like I was married to a hitman. So it's, it, it
That would have
was,
been a
it
good
was
title.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the next book. That's the next book.
Yeah.
That's right. Married to a hitman.
Hmm. Yeah. But so it was 7 days a week, but we're both accustomed to working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And as freelancers, I took a buyout from the Gazette in 2003. And so we've worked alongside each other for a really long time.
Yeah. So tell me, Julian, I have to ask you, what has been your fascination with the bikers? Like you said, this is not your first walk around the block on bikers.
That's right. I'd written Road to Hell with Bill Marsden of the Gazette, and then Angels of Death, and I've done numerous documentaries. Well, I'm fascinated by the dark side of society. You know, as an investigative journalist, I always say I'm in the bad news business. I'm not in the good news business. I leave that to others. And I'm fascinated not by who done it, but by why done it. Why does organized crime flourish? Why does it flourish in Canada? The Hells Angels are stronger in Canada than almost anywhere else in the world. And why also particularly in Montreal, which is, you know, unfortunately well known as a crime and murder capital. And I'm fascinated by the failures of the justice system. And while I'd written several books on the Hells Angels, in many ways, the Yves Trudeau story was the origin story. Because, you know, most of the people watching this, most of the suburban readers and the people at Cote-Saint-Luc Library know about Maurice Boucher and the biker wars of the 90s and the continuing violence today. But really, Yves Apache Trudeau helped start it all. He was a founding member of the Hells Angels back in 1977 when the California group wants to expand. They want to come to Canada. Where do they go? Montreal. And who do they choose? The most violent, active biker gang at the time called the Popeyes. And Yves Trudeau had already committed a couple of murders for them. And that's why the Hells Angels chose him and the Popeyes to become the first chapter. And he would go on in the next 15 years to commit more than 40 murders for the Hells Angels. And as we explain in the book, in many ways, he set the template, he set the bar, the precedent for then Maurice Boucher and the other Hells Angels in the 90s to say, hey, this guy got away unpunished for killing more than 40 people. We can also do that. And so that was the fascination in telling his story.
Lisa, do you ever get intimidated, you or your colleagues who are in this business? I mean, I see Paul Cherry, gutsy reporter for the Gazette, but you were
Absolutely.
covering justice. You were covering these crimes. Do you ever get intimidated? My gosh, I'm covering these people. They're looking right at me. They know who I am. I mean, and now you're writing a book about it.
You know, it's funny. No, I never have been. The one time when during the trial, or it was a hearing for the West End gang, they were all charged with drug importation, and they were challenging the arrests and the search warrants because of the Sûreté as it ended up. The Sûreté de Québec planted evidence. And Jerry Maddox, the head of the West End gang, would look at me in the trial and I would smile. And it was
Oh my.
because of that smile that I got an interview with him. I had the only interview with Jerry Maddox that he ever gave. So, no, I've never been intimidated. Now, that said, I'm really happy in this case that Julian, whenever he was giving talks to groups at a book launch or wherever, and people would ask him, "Aren't you scared of being attacked by the Hells Angels?" And his answer was always, "No, my wife always starts the car in the morning."
Oh my gosh, that's a funny.
And yeah, and he can't say that
Can't
anymore.
use that anymore. Can't
Nope.
use
No.
that anymore.
Nope.
But you know, but you raise a serious point. Look, our colleague Michel Auger, the famous Journal de Montréal reporter, was gunned down with 7 bullets by the Hells Angels. Miraculously, he survived. We just recently learned a few months ago that Daniel Reynaud, the crime reporter for La Presse, was on a kind of hit list by gangsters. So yeah, taking on these guys is dangerous. But that's how you fight bullies, right? You stand up to them and you expose them. And for too long, the Hells Angels in Canada and around the world have gotten this free PR ride, right? That everybody knows, well, they're dangerous, but they're kind of lovable rascals, right? They're the Hollywood movies and the Netflix series. And what we try to show in this book is not only are they killers, and not only do they kill their own and other gangsters, murder is murder, but there are innocent victims. Mothers and daughters and sisters who have been affected either directly, they were killed by Trudeau, or they survived his rampage. The book starts with a woman that Lisa spent a lot of time with from Montreal South Shore.
Yeah, whose brother was mistakenly killed by Trudeau. Um, the the way you tell the story, Trudeau is a typical killer. He's feeding his drug habit, and he doesn't have an ounce of guilt in his body for murdering all these people, does he? Or did he, should I say?
Not an ounce. Not an ounce. When he killed the wrong guy, when he killed Billy Weichel, the next morning, he apparently said, well, people who look like the name of his victim deserve
Yeah,
to be dead too. So
yeah,
He testified. He said killing is not a pleasure. He said it's a necessity.
yeah,
It was a job for him. Some people move up in the Hells Angels hierarchy by being good drug traffickers, others by extortion or organizing prostitution. He doesn't have a look of a killer. You'd never cast him in a Hollywood movie. He was thin and wiry, rather unthreatening. He stumbles into it. His first kill in 1970 was an accident. He was just supposed to take revenge on some poor guy, but he realized this was his ticket to power. This was his ticket inside the Hells Angels. And he got so good at it, the Hells Angels farmed him out to other gangs like the Irish West End gang.
yeah,
And it just shows how determined he was to do anything. And as you mentioned, once he became a cocaine addict, it became a vicious circle. He was making anywhere from as little as 5,000 per hit to as much as 200,000. So it was an important business for him. And what's shocking, of course, is, people ask, well, how did he get away with it? How did he hide from the police for these 15 years? He didn't have to hide because they weren't looking for him. They
yeah,
had no knowledge that there was a serial killer. They knew there were all these gangsters, and sometimes their mothers or sisters or girlfriends were dead, but they never suspected that it was the same person over and over. And only when his fellow bikers decided to turn against him and he felt he was going to be dead next, does he decide to become a police informant and confess to what the police never knew was this crime spree.
yeah,
Lisa, that
just
was
to add a
fast.
bit,
Yeah,
just
go
to
ahead.
add a bit to that, Mike,
Yeah,
is to say the police really didn't care at that point either. It was always a settling of accounts.
yes,
That
and
was it
just
between bikers.
further to that, Lisa, what was fascinating was the unveiling of the sweet deal he got. I mean, he was unscathed. He was getting steak dinners. He was living like a king. I liked the part. I knew Herbert Marks very well, and I didn't remember the coverage back then. I probably saw it in those days where he was not pleased with what they did. But you see a lot of that. But they made him this sweet deal. But Lisa, he turned out to be quite useless as a witness because he was untrustworthy on the stand.
A huge failure over 5 court appearances. He did not once convince a jury that he was telling the truth. It was any defense lawyer worth his salt, would just go through each of the murders, go through his past, go through the bombs, go through the the baseball bats, the beating people with his boots, kicking them and strangling them. And what jury would trust a guy like this?
Yeah,
But the point is that Look, to go after organized crime, especially a group as tight and as insulated as the Hells Angels, you're not going to get choir boys to testify against them, right? Almost by definition, anybody who's watched a mafia movie, or even an episode of Law and Order knows that you're often going to need gangsters who may have even been killers to flip and testify against their former comrade in arms. The problem is that if you're going to do that, you have to prepare them. You have to make sure they're telling the truth. And most importantly, you can't hang the entire case on them. You have to use their testimony and then back it up with police evidence and other witnesses. There was a killer that Maurice Boucher hired to kill those prison guards that everybody remembers back in the 1990s. And he failed in the first trial, but in the second trial, he helped convict Maurice Boucher and shut down the Hells Angels because the prosecution prepared him well. So, in the recent elections, we've seen, as always, politicians of all political hues talking about we have to be tough on crime. And that's true, but we have to be smart on crime. And what the Trudeau disaster shows is that it's not that we weren't tough on crime, but we weren't smart on crime. We didn't have the resources, the dedicated police forces, the prepared prosecution. That's why he was literally able to get away with murder.
Yeah,
Lisa,
let me just add to
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
Basically, with France Charbonneau was the prosecutor in the second Boucher trial, and she made sure to do research and back up everything that Stéphane Gagné said in his testimony, so that when the defense tried to do the same thing it had done in the first trial, she was able to say, but there's this. There's this video of him falling asleep on the table. There's all of these things that proves he's telling the truth. And that's really
Mike,
important.
I do have to intervene. In the first trial, when Boucher triumphantly walks out of the courthouse, he's acquitted, a free man, and he storms out and opens the doors, and he knocks down the journalists who are there. And the first person he knocks down is Lisa. And when I
Come
was
on.
editing the documentary Road to Hell for the Fifth Estate, and in the edit suite, I keep replaying that scene, right, where you see Boucher knocking down Lisa.
By mistake, Lisa?
I don't think he really, I mean, he didn't see me. He just was walking through, and anybody who was in his way, he knocked down.
Did he apologize?
No.
I know that he headed right to
He did.
forum to see a
He headed
fight
to the
with
forum
Davy
fight.
Hilton
That's
Jr.
right, and he got a standing ovation.
I
And
was
the
there
and the
that night,
wow,
and
and so was the police, the head of homicide.
yeah,
You know,
people
Andre
were running
Boucher.
up to
Boucher.
shake his hand
Yeah, absolutely,
like he was Donald
absolutely.
Trump.
That's
I
right.
just had to
That's
get
right.
that in there.
Yeah.
But
But again, it goes, that whole episode goes to, the myth around the Hells Angels, Jeanette Renault singing at their parties. And we see it today. There are new leaders of the Hells Angels in Quebec. One of them recently got married, the same kind of tabloid coverage. Right. And, going back to, Darlene, the sister of Billy Whitehold, who was killed accidentally by Yves Trudeau with no regrets. To this day, she still remembers that moment. She remembers not knowing what happened to him, finding out it was a serial killer that the police didn't care about, washing the blood off the driveway of their South
Yeah.
Shore home.
Yeah.
So that's the point about, the Hells Angels and these killers. It's not just that justice doesn't get done, but that the victims live with it to this day. And there's another Yves Trudeau out there. We've seen gangland shootings in Montreal. Greg Woolley, one of the rare Black associates of the Hells Angels, was gunned down on a South Shore parking lot back in November 2023. He's walking into a parking lot with his little baby and wife. From a distance, a sniper shoots him. That's a professional job. There's
yeah,
another Yves Apache Trudeau. There's another hitman out there.
yeah.
And we're making the same mistakes.
Yeah. Lisa, I have one more question for each of you. Lisa, you covered justice. We read a book like this. I mean, I don't know if there's even a proper answer for this question, but being a criminal, being a mobster, it doesn't seem to end well for anyone. You live your life looking over your shoulder. Your family's in jeopardy. You're eventually going to get killed, or you're going to get arrested, or you're going to be in jail. Why do they do it?
Uh, that's a good question. Why would they do it? The gangsters I've met, and you look at Maurice, Boucher's background, they come from backgrounds where they didn't have much, and this was what they did to make money, to support families, and to be accepted. I mean, it's warped. I do think that, you know, Apache Trudeau was warped. He wanted acceptance, and he found that killing people was the best way to get it.
Interesting. So, Julian, I'm going to end this off by asking you to plug the fact that you are going to be at the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library this summer doing some special classes. Tell us about it.
That's right. The Quebec Writers Federation has this fascinating program. I teach journalists around the world and how to do storytelling. I've done classes, as you know, with the suburban staff. But this is a special program called Storyscaping, and it's aimed at non-professionals, non-journalists, people who not only have never been journalists but don't want to be journalists. Just people who have stories to tell. Could be a memoir. You've talked to your parents about their experiences, that happened in your life, and you want to find a way to make it into a story. And so through the Quebec Writers Federation, different community groups can make a request for journalists like me. And so the Cote-Saint-Luc Library is going to be launching a series. I think we're doing it over 4 Fridays in July. So contact the Cote-Saint-Luc Library, and I'll see you there starting in July. And I promise you, we won't talk about hitmen or murders.
Well, let me commend both of you for a fantastic book. I'm sure we'll make it available at the library. It's at bookstores, it's online. Congratulations and all the best.
Thanks. And people
Thanks.
can find out more on our websites, Lisa's name, lisafitterman.com, my name, juliansher.com. We'll post copies of this interview, but there are articles, reviews, excerpts, and ways to get in touch with us. So stay safe, everyone.
Great. Doesn't get much better than that. Thank you.
Thank you.